Shabbat shalom, everyone. Funny business with these plagues. Now, before I get into this, I have some requests to make. And the first is that, does anybody know the difference between being a pashtan and being a darshan, being a literalist or being a, how do you translate darshan into English? Insane, I don't know. Or being an interpreter. Yeah. So it's important because most of the rabbinic way of doing things is being a darshan. It sort of thinks you understands the Torah as raw material, you can make whatever you want of it. And it's actually relatively rare for Jews to read the Bible, read the Torah in a literal fashion. Just sort of the story in and of itself, right? Now, one of the things I want to request is that during this for this conversation only, I would never seek to put limits on you otherwise, is that people engage in being a pashtan, which means that you look at the story for the story itself and you really engage in the text as it is. And the second thing I want you to do is I know that everybody thinks that they know the story of the Exodus. But one of the things I've noticed is that everybody thinks they know the story of the Exodus because they've read the Haggadah, which is actually a really imperfect retelling of the story of the Exodus. You notice that the Haggadah never actually tells the story of the Exodus from Egypt? Very frustrating. So one of the things I want to ask you to do is, if you want, we're on page 435, by the way, is when you're thinking about some of the questions that I'm about to ask you. Can people hear me, by the way, as I speak through the mask with the mic? Good. As you're thinking about some of the questions that I'm going to ask you, that you think of them through the eyes of the Torah and not through the eyes of the Haggadah, because the Torah is the real source. Very funny business about these plagues, in that it's a very long and drawn-out process. According to the Mishnah and the Eduyot, in Masachet Eduyot, the plagues took about a year to go through from start to finish. Now, you wouldn't know that, by the way, from reading the Torah itself, and forgive me for already breaking one of my own rules. But if you just read through the Torah, it's actually it's impossible to get a sense of how long the plagues took to take effect. So the rabbis come to the consensus that it took about a year to do the plagues. Now, given that what we're talking about, of course, is an omniscient, omnipotent creator, why did it have to take so long? 12 months of 10 plagues in a very belabored process to free the children of Israel from Egypt? Why didn't it happen all in one fell swoop? God comes in, shakes the divine finger at Pharaoh, says, bad boy, a little, pacha metuches, and then we're on. Why does it need to be such a belabored process, the plagues? Unless, of course, you disagree with me that this was the smoothest way that it could have happened. I'm interested in what people think. Why this?
Because I think God is trying to show who's boss, and by dragging it out longer, and I think God even says that. I don't have my book open, but I'm going to really drive home the idea that I am the God and I'm in charge here, and not that the fate and the well-being of the people was secondary, but the whole story of the Torah is I'm the boss.
Okay, so I was with you until that last sentence. So Jeff is right in that the Holy One is pretty explicit about why the process is being dragged out, which is to say, so that I may put my signs and wonders upon the people, and so that you may tell them to your children. The whole point of this is that there will be a story that you won't forget about. But the idea that the Torah is a record of God saying successfully that I'm the boss does not seem to ring true with me. There's a lot of, basically, the Torah seems to be a record of God saying, I'm the boss, and everybody else saying, we don't think so. So, right. Other thoughts on this? Yeah. Larry?
Hi, good morning. I think the whole process of having a degree of faith in this idea of redemption is not something that happens like all of a sudden. It's a very belabored, difficult process. So a year is a little bit of time for such a thing, I think.
So Larry, largely your point is that a year is actually a pretty short amount of time for such an important, for such a complicated process. Well said, well said. Whoever you choose, Matt. I leave the responsibility of this decision to you and its discontents. Yeah.
I think he had to wear Pharaoh down. And he started with little things, and it ended up with the big thing. But maybe he didn't want to end up with that big thing if Pharaoh would have agreed earlier. So he kind of warmed down until he just fell apart and had to agree at the end.
Interesting, Malka. Although we have to sort of think about that first plague, right? The first plague was blood in all the rivers of Egypt, such that all the fish died and nobody had anything to do. You know, it's not a small thing that we're talking about here. Other thoughts about this? Matt, good luck.
Well, I think we have an analogy in our own day. We're dealing with Hamas, right? It goes back and forth each day, each week. It could run aground and not happen. And I don't believe in a God who acts by fiat, right? I think God is a construct that's read back into the story later on. And so if you don't believe in a God who acts by fiat, in the world of politics, you've got a people who are ready to leave. You've got an oppressing nation that gets a lot of value from the slaves, and it takes time.
Okay, thanks, Rabbi. A few more answers on this?
Well, it's not only that it takes time, but God hardens Pharaoh's heart several times. In other words, even if Pharaoh was ready to give in, God makes a point of forcing him, hardening his heart, to reject it. So there's kind of it's mystifying exactly why that goes on, but it's definitely a sense that God was an actor, in defining for Pharaoh what needed to be done.
Okay. I just want to point out, before we get to the next one, that, you know, if my 7-year-old was designing the 10 plagues, T-Rexes would have been resurrected to just maraud. You know, it's a fascinating sort of choice as to why. I just want to get into the mindset of why it could have been done anyway. Why do it this way? Judy, did you want to say something here? Yeah.
All the plagues except maybe the last one are extreme versions of natural phenomena. And so blood has to come at the time the red tide would come. It takes, I mean, my view is that God uses the natural world. And you can't have frogs in August. You have frogs in March. You have the red tide at a certain time. And so God is using the natural world, but in a to extreme fashion. It's like, you know, it's like sending snow to New Orleans. Like you can send snow to New Orleans, but you don't do it in August, right? You have to do it in January. And that's my view of why it takes a year.
For what reason?
Because God works through the natural world rather. Like it would be more spectacular to have snow in New Orleans in August. But if you're using the natural world, you have snow in New Orleans in January, and that's horrible enough to make a big impression.
We're going to stop here, though I'd like to see the hands raised. We're going to stop here, and we'll come back in an aliyah or two to ask a few more questions about the process of the plagues. All right? Thank you. Let's start with the first aliyah.
So, does somebody have the sheet with the aliyot listed on it? Okay. And I will note that it says in your handout that we are starting with the Sheni aliyah, what would be the second aliyah. A couple of reasons for this. One is that as we've been talking about, we are reading about the plagues. We got enough plagues. And the other is, I will just throw in a plea here. If you'd like to read Torah, let us know. We always need more readers.
So we're in Exodus chapter 8, verse 24, page 439.
ויעזור ויגן וישלח חסים בו ונאמר אמן. הכל לבוא ולדבר להן יש כבוד לתורה. יעמדו Neil and Myrna Goldenberg, Nachman Raphael Ben Usha ושנדל, ומנדל בת שאול הרש ופרד לעלייה הראשונה. ברוך שנתן תורה לעמו ישראל בקדושתו, ואתם הדבקים בנעליכם חיים כולכם היום. Hi, here comes the reader.
ויאמר משה, ויאמר פרעה.
Baruch Adonai Barak.
Baruch Adonai Barak Leolam Vaed.
Baruch Adonai Barak Leolam Vaed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kivanu levadam tov, v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
אמן. ויאמר פרעה, אנוכי אשלח אתכם, תתבטאם לאדוני אלוהיכם במדבר, רק הרחק לא תרחיקו ללכת הארתי בידי. ויאמר משה, הנה אנוכי יוצא מעמך והתרתי אל אדוני ואסר הערוב מפרעה מעבדיו ומעמו, מחר רק על יוסף פרעה אתן לבלתי שלח את העם לזבוח לאדוני. ויצא משה מעם פרעה ויתר אל אדוני ויעש אדוני כדבר משה, ויסר את הרוב מפרעה מעבדיו ומעמו, לא נשאר אחד. ויכבד פרעה את ליבו גם הפעם הזאת, ולא שילח את העם.
Baruch Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torah emet, v'chayei olam natan b'tochenu. Baruch Atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Myrna and Neil, I'm going to stay down here to spare you some of the special gifts that I have to give this Shabbat. Misha Berach Imotenu Sarif Karachav Leav Avraham Evotenu Avraham Yitzhak Yaakov. Hu Yivarech et Nachman Raphael Ben Usha V'Shendel Mindel Bat Shal Hirsch V'Freda Shalu Hayom L'Chvoda Shabbat V'Lichvoda Torah. And for the honor, we want to bless Neil and Myrna Goldenberg, who are coming up to celebrate their 68th anniversary before. I don't know that I've ever met somebody who had a 68th anniversary before. I hear, by the way, we're going to get, I hate to upstage you, but next week we'll have 73. So you were 7, 8 years old when you met each other? Like what? I stand in awe of a life together and what you've accomplished simply by living it and by being with each other. Almost 7 decades of love and of care and of relationship, of all the stuff that married couples go through but falling apart, of family and of kindness, of difficulty and of repair. I think that it's something rare and beautiful in this world, what the two of you represent. And I think all of us sort of sitting here just want to, it's almost beyond a mazel tov, to sit back and appreciate from the goodness of what the two of you share. We wish you a mazel tov on behalf of this community. I had an insight this year that seems to me, I think, to be like, it landed pretty solidly for me in terms of what I think is actually going on in the story. By the way, we're back on page 435 with the blood. Because the blood is a very odd plague. Now, someone apparently came through a Dot Shalom at one point in time and did a drash about red tide, because I've heard this from about 7, 8 people at some point. But the algae? Okay. Maybe a fewer than I thought. But the reason I think that the plagues start with the blood is pretty straightforward, which is that there is already blood in the Nile, and the Holy One is determined to display that to the entirety of Egypt. From where did the blood in the Nile come, might I ask? That's right. Listen, remember that in the story itself, this is why it's helpful to know the story from beginning to end, as it's clear that so many of you do, which is to say that not only did Pharaoh say, go take the newborn boys and, God forbid, kill them, but where should you put their bodies? And why should you put their bodies in the Nile? So that no one will see them, so that they'll be obliterated by the river and by the animals and by the bacteria, and it will be like they never existed. And so here come the plagues to say, the first plague to say, that which you thought is hidden is now revealed. Not only revealed in the Nile, but revealed in every river in Egypt. Every river in Egypt. Every Egyptian will know that at the bottom of the Nile is this blood. This seems to me to be an important message of at least the first plague. And so my question for you is this. Thinking about the plagues that come to follow, right? There's the frogs. Okay, I don't know what to do with the frogs. I'm just going to be honest with you. But what comes after the frogs? After frogs comes lice. And after lice comes insects, right? And after insects comes dever, which is like a plague of livestock. And after the plague of livestock comes shechin, which is boils. What's the point? Assuming, by the way, that these are non-random, that there's actually meaning behind the choice of what the content of the plagues are. What is being shown? What is being demonstrated here? What is the point of these different plagues? Yeah, would someone bring Audrey a microphone? Matt, do you still have the mic? Sorry about that.
Thank you. It seems to me that it's not only a matter of God proving to Pharaoh his strength, but it's a great organizing effort to spread these plagues among both the Egyptians as well as the Israelites, to show those people the strength of God. And nothing does it like having lice and boils and having your fields infested with locusts and all those other things. So I think it's a great way for, God to show, follow me, because I know what I'm doing, and to the Egyptians, let them go, because I've got the Israelites. But the people need convincing, and I think this is what that's attempt to do.
It's about convincing the people.
It's about organizing the people
Okay,
to
about
get them to
organizing the
go.
people. Kit's over there. Want to hear a little bit more about this? As Robin and Derek leave me, apparently they're not interested in the Josh today. I really enjoy embarrassing my friends in Shul. I just want to let you know. Yeah. Yeah.
Shabbat Shalom. Well, I think it's also where all kingdoms are going to be impacted. So it's, almost like mineral, vegetable, animal, human, and then on another level spiritually. So there's no creation that's exempt.
Okay. No creation that's exempt. Thank you. Matt, I saw that Noah had a hand up over here.
Sorry, where?
Noah. Yeah.
I want to take a slightly different take on this. Is that okay?
Of course.
Though I look at it a little bit differently. I look at the whole thing as Moses had very direct experience of the divine, which very few people get. It's a fleeting thing. It's a moment. It's a fleeting thing.
Mm-hmm.
It is not something that can be described at all. However, he does have a duty to describe. He does have a duty to get those people out. He has to somehow communicate. And the only way we can communicate, the only way that our brain can connect is through language and metaphor and connecting with something visceral that we can imagine. And so for me, this whole thing is the story to be able to communicate what the ism, what did you call it? The ismism of the universe.
The majestic isness.
The majestic ism. This Yehovah, this I am the everything, which is impossible for us to grasp. So then we need this story. And we need a lot of time to process that. And we need a lot of images. We need it because we can't grasp it. So I look at it like that.
It's a very fair point, Noah. It's a very fair point that I think that it's a way of driving home that, making tangible that which cannot be made tangible. But again, I just want to ask the question of I feel like it's a very meta place where you are right now. And this year I'm very interested in why these. For example, just send 3 or 4 comets to destroy the pyramids and see how people deal with it then. There was a way of doing this that was different and other than the way that it's actually done, which is really actually to make the plagues live in all these people's bodies and their lives in this very visceral kind of a way. Why these kinds of plagues? Was there a hand over here? Kevin, did you want to say something?
I can't explain which plagues and why, although I think the first plague of Dam you explained very well, and the concept of blood is used so much through the Torah. In fact, we think of kashrut, we have to make sure that we don't have the blood in the meat that we eat. But for me, I think it was part of what Malka was saying. He had to wear down, no, he or she.
Thank
I
you.
refuse to
Baruch
be
Hashem.
gender there. God had to wear down the Egyptians, certainly had to wear down Pharaoh. He had to build up Moses so that Moses could really be the leader that he needed to be in the desert already, so that took time. He had to really build up the Jews, and he had to build up the Jews enough that they were willing to take the blood of the lamb that was so precious to the Egyptians and put it on their doorpost, and the angel of death didn't need to know which was the Jewish homes and which not by the blood, but the Jews had to take the step of saying they wanted to be taken out of Egypt, they deserved to be, and they took an active part of blood, so it even goes back to the first plague, and it also goes to the fact that the children, the male children, were put into the Nile, and the 10th plague is that the firstborn of Egypt is involved.
All right, thank you, Kevin. Appreciate it. One more comment, maybe?
Hello. Again, not going to the specifics of the plagues, they're all bad. But it is, I think, at least in part, an important example that the greatest of rewards come from the greatest of adversity. Simple as that.
Well and concisely said. Let's continue with the second aliyah.
Which is still on page 439, Exodus chapter 9, verse 1.
Yamod, Aaron Strauss, Aaron ben Shem Tov, Malka Chai, the aliyah shniya.
Baruch hu et Adonai hamborach.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai hamborach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher karvanu levodato v'natan lanu et torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe bo el Paro v'dibarte elav. כה אמר אדוני אלוהי העברים, שלח את עמי ועבדוני, כי עמאן אתה לשלח, ואותך מחזק בם. הנה יד אדוני היה במקנך אשר בשדה, בסוסים, בחמורים, בגמלים, בבקר ובצאן, דבר כבד מאוד. והפלא אדוני בין מקנה ישראל ובין מקנה מצרים, ולא ימות מכל לבני ישראל דבר. וישם אדוני מועד לאמור, מחר יעשה אדוני הדבר הזה בארץ. ויעשה אדוני את הדבר הזה ממחרת, ויעמד כל מקנה מצרים, וממקנה בני ישראל לא מת אחד. וישלח פרעה, והנה לא מת ממקנה ישראל עד אחד. ויפלג לב פרעה ולא שילח את העם.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torat emet b'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Friends, let's say a prayer for those who are ill. Please come forward if you'd like to say Mishaberach for the ill. להחזיקם, לרפאותם וישלח להם רפואה שלמה מן השמיים, רפואת הנפש ורפואת הגוף. שבאתי מלזעוק רפואה קרובה לבוא, אשתבח עליו בזמן קריב, ונאמר אמן. May they be healed soon. Please be seated.
Maftir is on page 448. It's Exodus chapter 9, verse 33.
Yamod, Ted Berman, Yonatan ben Yaakov, Amalka Le'ala Maftir.
Baruch Hu et Adonai Hambarach.
Baruch Adonai Hambarach Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hambarach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kirvanu lavoto v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. Vayetze Moshe mein paro et ha'ir vayifroz kapav el Adonai vayachdelu hakalot v'habarad v'umatar lo nitach artza vayar paro ki chadal hamatar v'habarad v'hakolot v'yosef l'chato v'yichabed libo v'yabadav v'yichazak lev paro v'lo shilach et b'nei Yisrael ka'asher diber Adonai b'yad Moshe.
Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chai olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch Atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Well, Suzanne, I forced you back in here, so I might as well get to the point.
Yep.
I can't speak for all of the plagues, but for a large majority of them, it feels like to me as if there is actually a bright thread that links them all, a message behind them, something that the Egyptians in particular are supposed to listen to hear, a voice that becomes unavoidable for them. And it's something like this. You know, all of those plagues, the lice, and the livestock disease, and the boils, right? These are things that the Israelites probably would have experienced on a regular basis as low-class slaves in Egypt. People who were not protected, people who dealt with the animals and the other things that the Egyptians didn't want to deal with, who didn't have enough food to eat or enough protection from the sun. Their skin would have been abraded and their bellies would have been emptied, and they would have suffered first at any natural disaster that would have come their way. I still can't explain the frogs, I'm sorry. Maybe somebody else can. And so what whispers to me, actually, what shouts to me from the message of the plagues, is that the message is being spread to all of Egypt. You will know what it is like to feel like an Israelite feels. You will know it. You'll know it in your body. You'll know it in your stomach. You'll know it in your bed. Right? You'll know it in your household. You will know what it's like to feel like a slave. It's for this reason, by the way, that one of the redeeming portions of the story, which I think is kind of misunderstood, happens. You know, there's this funny promise that when the Israelites leave Egypt, they'll come out wealthy. Do you remember that? God actually promises this to Moses at the mountain. And when the Israelites are leaving, and they're leaving in the middle of the night, and they're sort of walking by, it basically seems to be that the Egyptians actually can't help but give all of their stuff. They're sort of freely, absurdly giving all of their stuff to the Israelites. And rather than seeing that as a moment of fear and suffering, what I sort of see in that moment is that finally they get it. Finally they get what they've done, living on the backs of all of these people for generation after generation after generation. Finally they get it. It's interesting, by the way, that an Egyptian in recent times actually attempted to sue the state of Israel for theft based off of the biblical account. This is not a joke. Israelis were forced to respond to this and submitted a countersuit for back pay. I wish I was making this up. Rabbi, you know this book. This is Michael Walzer's Exodus and Revolution. I'm afraid that you're going to be hearing more from this book, I think, in the weeks and months and years to come. One of the things that Walter does, he's a brilliant political and moral philosopher, and he speaks about the story of the Exodus in a way that's really beyond my capability to sum up. It's worth your time to read this entire book. But one of the things he does distinguish is between sort of elemental protest, which is to say the response of people who feel beaten down and oppressed just sort of breaking out, and a more purposeful protest, which is what I think is happening here during the plagues, in which there is a message that is being driven home. And the question I have for all of us is that I think that there is a time coming, and it's coming, I don't know, relatively soon. I don't exactly know when the time will be, when the right moment will come, in which we are going to be expected to stand up. Our conscience will not permit us to do otherwise. It feels too soon to me in this moment. I don't know exactly what's happening on the outside. I see everything that's happening in the news. I read the articles. I understand. But I don't know the shape of it yet. I can't get the feel of it yet. But when that time comes, I think the question that I have is, what is the song that we want to sing? What is the message that we want to get across? What is the voice of the Holy One that we are going to demand that people hear? I'm not asking this as a rhetorical question. I'm asking it as a real question. Because behind, I think, every great protest movement and every movement for justice is that message that is being drummed home again and again and again and again. So before we move on, I'd actually like to gather a thought or two from you about what is it that the world needs to hear in this time and in this place. Right, sorry, I wish I asked easier questions, you know. Yeah.
Can I lean into our tradition of answering the question that you asked earlier?
I want you to be careful with this because I'm taking really, really seriously. So if you want to do it, go ahead. But I really mean what I'm asking is something is really at the deepest level.
Okay, then I'll be short.
Right.
But I think this is also the story of
You're not speaking.
a leader with a hardened heart, right? It took this long and there was this much suffering because the leader, who probably was really buffered from the suffering, didn't suffer or harden his heart to the suffering of his people. And he suffered immensely. I don't have an answer to your next question.
Okay, thanks.
I think we saw a hint of it from the Episcopal bishop earlier this week, and I think what we really need is a message that is about love, about embracing all of us, not just one side or the other. Love for everybody.
Thanks.
I think about, I remember Dick Cheney was the only Republican okay with gay marriage because he had a gay daughter. And I think having Pharaoh feel it himself, finally, he could make sense, he could move forward.
So I like the idea of it's about we have to love and accept each other as we are, and we have to love everyone across both sides, and I actually don't think that that's the point. I think that there's like a basic acceptance of the value of human life, and I think that part of what we're being called to say is that like there is actually a right side and there is actually a wrong side, and that when we say that like it's a two-sided issue and both sides have validity and that we need to respect everybody's views, we're actually taking the side of the oppressor and saying it's okay for that oppression to happen because it's just about perspective, it's just about opinion, it's not. For a lot of these issues, at least the ones that have come out this week around trans rights, around immigration, there is actually an ethically right side and an ethically wrong side, and we spent a lot of time saying, or much of the country has spent a lot of the time saying it's a two-sided debate, and it's actually not. You can debate it from both sides, but ethically there's a right side and a wrong side.
We were the Joan Baez's of the world today. I remember listening about that time when things were going bad in the civil rights movement, and I remember listening to something, then standing up and shouting and singing, "This land is your land, this land is my land," and saying, "This is my land too, it's not yours." And I'm waiting for that to come forward.
So yesterday, two former colleagues of mine at DOJ were told that they have to leave their jobs enforcing our laws and defending the decisions of the administration in the environmental protection realm, and begin to prosecute cities for their role as sanctuary cities. And they're being told that if they fail to do this, they will be punished. That's just a small anecdote of the fact that what we felt 8 years ago was sometimes something that we mocked and laughed and made light of. And I don't think that is something that my peers and I feel this time. There's something much more somber as we see the intentionality that occupies every action depicted on the front page and in the news. I don't have a direct answer to your question, but I think that people who care about human decency are deeply sober and mindful of the seriousness of this moment, and I don't think that we are going to respond in real time now the way we did 8 years ago. We're still forming our response based on what we see unfolding minute by minute.
Okay, maybe one or two more. Just.
Thank you. The bishop's comments made me think the space I want to be in is what would Jesus do? I find it really remarkable, the contortions that the evangelical community has gone through to absolve themselves of that question, and I want to be in that conversation.
I think the Jewish perspective is, what would Deutero-Isaiah do?
I think we need to project power. I think we need to take a step back and do some thinking and planning and not react to everything. And we have to sift through the crazy shit we're getting, and we have to find power and be sense of power. That's what I think we really need to work on.
Thank you. Listen. What's that? I don't think right now. Hey, I got to get the people out, you know. We're already going to be late as it is. Yeah. Let my people eat. A time is coming, and in that time, God is going to whisper a message to us. There's a message coming, a song that's going to be sung, and it's not going to be the song that we expected it to be. It's not going to fit directly into our expectations of what's wrong and what's right, the way that things should be or they not to be. It's not going to be theoretical at all. It's going to be actual, and it's going to be practical, and it's going to be real. It's going to be hard for some of us to hear, and others of us are going to thrill at it, and it's going to ask of us a kind of commitment that I think will be quite difficult. But it's coming. And the most important thing that we can do right now is to have be kshuvot. Our ears have to be open and willing to hear that message and that voice that can be summed up almost as simply as the sentence that I tried to sum up the plagues with. You will know what it feels like to have been an Israelite slave. That was the message to Pharaoh. Maybe Dr. Brooks, or actually he's not a doctor, but Professor Brooks, Reverend Brooks, last week could have summed up King's words in such a beautiful and simple way, although I think it's beyond me, not being a scholar of Dr. King. But that message is coming. And when we hear it, and when it comes into our ears and into our hearts, we have a holy responsibility to start to sing that song too, and to walk to its beat, and to march to its rhythm. I don't know what it is yet, but it is coming. Shabbat Shalom.